Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my pretty small March wrap-up. I spent a good portion of the month of March trying to get myself back on track. You may remember that February was also a tough reading month. Most of these books I finished in the second half of March, and I think I said this at the end of February in my February wrap-up. I feel like the next month is going to be my time to shine. I'm going to be getting my reading back on track. We'll see what happens though. I'm kind of taking it day by day. We are in the middle of a pandemic. I think I can be maybe forgiven. So in March, I ended up reading 5 books, which isn't great. Usually I tend to read like double that. But I did also spend some time reading a couple of books that I DNF'd. I DNF'd them after giving them a pretty good chance. So as I said, it was a little bit of a slower reading month, but I did really like the vast majority of the books that I did actually complete. So let's talk about the DNFs first. If you saw my most recent reading vlog, I think I've started vlogging again, which is so exciting. But in one of my reading vlogs from this month, I talked about DNFing The Cottingley Cuckoo by A.J. Elwood. I read about 30% of this book and it just wasn't really for me. There were a couple of things that I was really hoping for, like certain elements that it would have, that it just didn't. And it was very clearly, it was not quite my jam, but just because it's not for me doesn't mean that it's not for you. So if it sounds interesting, go ahead and give it a go. It's my disclaimer for all books that I don't like. So this book follows a character named Rose, and she is a young woman working in a care home in the UK, and she feels very trapped by her life, despite the fact that she sees this job as something very temporary. She wants to go on to do bigger and better things. She is working in this nursing home, and she meets one of the residents who's kind of like the problematic one. No one wants to deal with her. Her name's Charlotte. She's just not a very nice person. And Charlotte ends up kind of like glomping onto Rose, basically, but in a very sinister way. And she begins showing her these letters that she has that are supposedly proof that the Cottingley fairies were real. So the Cottingley fairies, a real life sort of photographic hoax, were basically pictures of little girls playing with fairies. You can look them up if you like. But it was something that Arthur Conan Doyle really fully supported and believed. It turned out to be a hoax and it really ruined his reputation. So Charlotte says that she has these letters that prove that these fairies are real, and is kind of like drip feeding them to Rose, knowing that this is hooking her and kind of reeling her in. It's quite sinister. So Rose discovers that she's pregnant. She really begins to feel kind of the walls closing in, but she also starts to kind of start seeing and hearing strange, bizarre things. This is meant to be quite a dark book. It was meant to be very kind of tense and suspenseful, and I didn't find that to be the case at all. A lot of the sort of tension that I would have expected was not there, mostly because on page 1, Rose is like, this Charlotte person seems like kind of a sinister character, and we just go straight on in. There's no tension there, there's no build up, nothing. And I felt like that kind of left me lacking some interest in this book. Also, Rose is a total wet blanket. She is, I understand, we write books about characters who are not necessarily super awesome and strong all the time, which is great. I actually quite enjoy that, but I have to have some kind of inkling that she is at some point going to grow a spine, and it seems like she's just very happy to be pushed around her entire life. I really struggled with her a lot. So for those reasons, I ended up DNFing this at about 30%. I would be very curious to hear what you think if you have picked this up, but it was not for me. The other book that I DNF'd was a novella, and this actually really surprised me because it's by one of my favorite sci-fi authors. So this is Brothers Ruin by Emma Newman. I suspect, because I can think of 3 off the top of my head, when authors I really love write both sci-fi and fantasy, I seem to much more enjoy the sci-fi. So this book is a sort of gas lamp fantasy. It's a Victorian set fantasy novella where the British Empire and the British government kind of control magic, and you basically, if you show any kind of latent magical ability, you are swept away. You never see your family again. You have these really strict rules sort of like thrown at you. You can't marry, you can't have children, none of this kind of thing, and you're basically owned by the crown. However, your family gets, you know, compensated, you become very wealthy, and you get to do magic-y stuff. So our main character, Charlotte, is not only an extremely talented illustrator who publishes her illustrations under a male pseudonym, she is also an incredibly powerful latent magician, but she is hiding this because she doesn't want to sort of give up her life and her privacy. She has a fiance, she wants to live her life, she doesn't want to become a magician for the crown. However, when her brother supposedly shows some kind of latent magical ability, she decides she's going to help him to help save their family from debt. It was fine. Charlotte was one of those characters who didn't really have a lot that was very interesting about her. She had all these things about her, like she's this latent magician and she's this wonderful illustrator, but it felt very kind of hollow. Just because she's super great at stuff and is super awesome and amazing doesn't mean that I'm going to like her, and she was totally flat. I really didn't enjoy her character, and I just wasn't really taken in by the story at all. So that was a real shame because, as you know, Emma Newman's Planetfall books are like some of the top tier sci-fi out there. They're some of my absolute favorite books ever in any genre, and I think that maybe just her fantasy is not for me, which is totally fine because that's happened with some of my other favorite authors too. Okay, so now we're moving on to the books that I did finish this month. The first one I was about 50 pages, halfway through, something like that, I don't remember, at the beginning of the month, and I ended up finishing this up in the first couple weeks of March, and it was one of those books that reached this like amazing climax and then just fell off of a cliff. So this is The Project by Courtney Summers. I was super excited for this book because it has so many elements that I really love. We've got sisters, we've got cults, we've got charismatic cult leaders, we've got mysteries, we've got all this crazy stuff coming together, and it just totally fizzled. I wonder if maybe like 50 pages was cut off the ending because like this went nowhere. And it was such a shame. So this book follows two sisters. We have Lo and we have Bee. So Bee is the older sister, and when she is a teenager, their parents are in a horrible car accident and are killed. Lo, her younger sister, was in that car accident as well. She survived, but was kind of clinging to life there at the beginning. So Bee decides she's going to seek out a miracle, and she manages to stumble across this man named Lev Warren, and he is sort of starting up this little tiny like social project called The Project, and Bee believes that he brings her sister back to life and performs this great miracle. So she goes off with him and never communicates with her sister again. So in the future, when Lo is about that age, about 16 or 18, she ends up deciding that she is going to write an article about the project, and she's going to dig into them and kind of how sinister they are, and she's going to get her sister back because she works for this like small newspaper. So we have her story in the present, we have Bee's story in the past, and they kind of like intertwine. And I really was enjoying where this was going. And then, as I said, we hit the midpoint. Not even the midpoint, it was like 2/3 of the way through, and we had this amazing climax, and then nothing happened. Nothing happened. All of this was set up for nothing, which sucks. It made me so mad. So I originally gave this 3 stars because I wanted to be fair, because the beginning bit is really good, but this is one of those books where the more I think about it and the more I talk about it, the angrier I get, so it might actually be more like a 2-star rating, because the potential here was so good, and it just, I cannot emphasize how badly this book fell flat on its face. It's shocking. Then I picked up Across the Green Grass Fields by Shauna McGuire. This is the 6th book in the Wayward Children series, which is, of course, you'll probably know by now, about children who basically fall down the rabbit hole like Alice, go into a portal to another world, and at some point they are either kicked out, they come back, they're thrown out, whatever, and they have to kind of cope with real life again. So this book is a little bit different because it doesn't deal with the school, Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, at all, but it does deal with a girl who ends up going to this place called the Hooflands, which is filled with unicorns and centaurs and all these amazing, amazing creatures. So we have Reagan, who is a little girl, and she has a close group of two other girlfriends. One is definitely like kind of mean girl, queen bee type, and the other is a little bit more of a pushover. The mean girl ends up pushing their other friend out, and Reagan kind of like knows her place in this friendship. It is to sort of like be the one who yes ma'ams her friend and never sets a toe out of line. However, her friend ends up revealing a great secret of Reagan's, and Reagan runs away. She finds a doorway and she goes through to the land of the centaurs. Now in the Hooflands, humans have a very specific role. They are meant to be heroes. They don't necessarily live that long, but they arrive when there is kind of a great terrible thing that is going to happen. So there's sort of like the calm before the storm. So when a human arrives, you know bad stuff is going to be going down. So Reagan learns that she has to become this hero, and she's very, very reluctant. I really liked this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I liked it much, much more than the last book. And I'm really happy we're moving away from Jack and Jill because they're the most boring characters ever. And we're getting some new worlds, new characters, new situations, and I really, really enjoyed that. So this wasn't a new favorite in the series, but I did really, really like it, and it was a really lovely read. I liked the message that came through at the end as well, so this was a 4-star read. Then we have The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. This is an urban fantasy book set in Edinburgh, and we have a character who basically talks to ghosts as a profession. So we follow Ropa, who is this ghost talker. She basically carries messages between the dead and their surviving relatives, and that's how she makes her money. So she is kind of minding her own business. She is the breadwinner for her family, which is her grandmother and her little sister. They're very poor, and she is kind of, you know, hustling, trying to make ends meet. And she finds out that there is something in Edinburgh that is sort of stealing away children and returning them as these kind of twisted, empty husks. And she doesn't want to get involved at first, but she ends up deciding to investigate and seeing what happened. So this was really, really fun. I really enjoyed this. I found it a little bit slow to start, but once I really got into it, it just absolutely flew by. I really liked his sort of vision of a kind of quasi-post-apocalyptic Edinburgh. It's still very much like the city we know, which is a very spooky city, but something has happened in the background that has led to, for example, gasoline shortages. So people either walk, ride bikes, use, you know, horse-drawn carriages, and there's like food shortages, and there's sort of like roving gangs moving through Edinburgh, and it's really, really interesting. I felt like the atmosphere that he creates is so incredibly strong and so faithful to Edinburgh, a place that I know and love, but still became something totally new. Ropa's an amazing character as well. She is so incredibly funny, but she's definitely one of those people who uses humor to mask a lot of pain, because she's had a very, very tragic past, and she sort of carries the burden of trying to care for her grandmother and her little sister, making sure that her little sister goes through school, and you can tell that that humor very much covers that up. But it doesn't ever feel like, I don't know, like it's fake or anything like that. She's such a genuine character, and she has such an amazing voice. I loved like all of the slang that is in this, and I loved kind of her general attitude as well. I thought she was just absolutely fabulous. She was so, so, so fun. So I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely fabulous, and I would highly recommend picking this up, even if you're not necessarily a fan of urban fantasy, because I very much am not. But if you're a fan of kind of like books that have those paranormal ghosty elements, I would definitely recommend this. And I would also say if you liked the Rivers of London series, you should definitely pick this up, but this is better. Then we had my favorite book of the year so far. This is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. So The Unbroken was everywhere pre-publication, like everywhere. I like saw it all over my social media feeds. I saw a ton of friends were reading it. It was everywhere. And I have to say, it was fabulous. It was so incredibly good. I'm so happy that I picked this up. So this is a book that is quite brutal, and it is quite tough in a lot of ways, because it's a book about the harms of colonialism. So in this book we have two characters and two points of view. First of all, we have Terrain, who is a member of the Colonial Brigade. She is a soldier, but she is a soldier who is snatched away from her homeland as a child and basically brought up in a foreign empire to serve said empire that took her from her family and sort of squashed all her heritage and her ability to speak her own language, and has raised her to be this great soldier. And she's very thankful for that. She actually is very much like, I am very happy for the life that I was given. I'm much better off than I would have been in my homeland, all of this. So at the beginning of this book, she and the rest of the Colonial Brigade are heading to Kazal, which is actually the city that she is from, because they are going to be helping squash a rebellion and protect the Empire's citizens that live there. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, she begins to become very, very conflicted as parts of her past begin to rear their head. She sees the way that the Baladarians, who are the citizens of this empire, treat her people in her native city, and she becomes very, very conflicted, shall we say. So the other story that we have in this is Luca, who is the Baladarian princess. She is the next in line for the throne. Her uncle is currently the king regent and is sort of holding the throne for her until she proves that she can rule. As I'm sure you can imagine, he's probably going to be trying to hold on to this forever and not give up his seat of power. So what she's doing is she's going to Kazal, and she is going to help put down this rebellion and make it this great example for the empire and prove that she can rule. So things don't go according to plan, as I'm sure you can imagine, again, and she ends up needing someone who can sort of speak to the rebels and sort of negotiate on her behalf, because obviously they don't trust her and it's very dangerous for her. So she ends up plucking Terrain out of this horrible situation, and sort of she becomes her very reluctant go-between. This book is so fast-paced, it is so action-packed, and I often say, like, this is a longer book. It's not that long, it's just under 500 pages, but like, I always say, I love a long book if it feels like it should be a long book, because often I find that very long books really could have been trimmed down in some places. There is not a wasted scene in this book. Every single scene is a moving part for the greater story, and it's so tightly edited and it is so tightly written, it's just fabulous. And that's one of the reasons that it flies by so quickly. I really enjoyed the exploration of the themes of colonialism in this book, even though it is quite uncomfortable in a lot of ways, especially with the kind of microaggressions that you see throughout the book, but also with Terrain's sort of internalized sort of racism and kind of hatred of herself, and seeing her begin to unpick those things is really fascinating. And Luca's a really interesting character as well, because she really feels like she is doing the right thing, and she is, by her people, by the Baladarians, not the people in this colony or any others. And it's really fascinating to see them kind of butt heads, to see her butt heads with the rebels, and sort of try to figure out what the best course of action for everyone is, which with colonialism, you're not going to have a best course of action for everyone. So it was really interesting. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really well done, fabulous. I cannot wait for the next one. This is probably my favorite book of the year so far. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. And the very last book that I read last month was a teeny tiny little novella, and the sequel to one of my favorite books from 2020. This is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Naivo. In the series, we follow a character named Chi, who is a cleric who sort of goes around collecting stories from all across the land. So in this particular book, they end up kind of in the frozen north with a mammoth herder and her mammoth, and they end up getting trapped in a way station by 3 tigers. So Chi offers to tell the story of the greatest tiger that has ever existed, and it begins this kind of back and forth of, well, this is how the humans tell it, no, that's incorrect, this is how the tigers tell it, correct your story or we'll eat you, kind of thing, and it's really well done. It is a really fabulous book. in The Empress of Salt and Fortune, the first book in this series, it is really, really noticeable how incredibly strong her storytelling skills are, because it's not necessarily a straight narrative, which this one is a little bit more, but that book in particular sort of is a very unique storytelling style, and she definitely has a lot of those elements in this book as well. It totally flies by. It's such a delight to read. It's quite dark in a lot of ways, but it is also very funny, and it is very poignant, and it's just a fabulous, fantastic read. I could not recommend this series more highly. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was so good, so wonderful, and I think this is the last book, but I'm not 100% sure, and I really, really, really want more from this series, so fingers crossed. So that is it for my March wrap-up. It was a little bit of a tinier stack of books that we were going through this month, but I did end up enjoying the majority of what I read, so I am counting that as a win. I am feeling like I am getting my kind of reading mojo back a little bit more, so fingers crossed I will do a lot more reading in April because I have so many amazing books that I want to read. I would love to know in the comments below if you have read any of these books, what you thought about them, maybe if they're in your TBR, and what you read last month. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.